Is that a little too low?
All right, we'll get started here. I'd like to welcome everyone to the 965th monthly meeting of the Amateur Telescope Makers of Boston. Today we'll have 3 member speakers at the end of the club business. So we'll have Mario Motta, Doug Paul, and Glenn Chappell give talks on various subjects of what they're working on currently. The agenda is a little slimmer than last time, so hopefully this will be a quicker running meeting. We'll see. We'll have plenty of time for the talks, hopefully. Some optimism.
This was the last 2 months, right?
Ever since
You'd be lucky to get
his new telescope.
Yeah, right.
Well, you know, between the clouds and the wildfire smoke, it's the wildfire smoke that's really killing us. And even on Tuesday night, when I left Framingham, my skies were milky white.
Yeah.
And if you've been following the extent of the wildfire smoke, it's back over us again.
Yeah,
And it's
you can't
pretty
take
thick.
images low in the sky because it's worse.
Yeah, of course, of course.
When you look up, how do you tell, without an app or something, how can we tell whether it's smoke or clouds?
Well, sometimes it's hard. You know,
Daytime.
sometimes haziness will make the sky look milky white, yes. But this is a different kind of a look to the sky. It's
Rayleigh scattering.
Brownish.
Daylight kind of
yeah,
turns
it's
peach
awful.
colored.
It's awful.
Well, there is a
Right
way.
at dusk, it's brown.
There is a way. It gradually increases in density as you go down because you're looking through
Okay, that makes
more
sense. Sure.
atmosphere.
Your eyes itch.
So anyway, it'll clear up any minute or month, something like that.
Oh, okay. This is an observation from Robert Burnham, who did the Celestial Handbook, the 3 volumes, which is still a classic. I know they're getting updated. I can't think of what it's called now. Annals of the Deep Sky, I think, is a new thing coming out. But it's not as rich as this one was. I was just talking to an ATMoB member today about it. She has that particular volume, and it was done back in the 1970s. So yeah, a lot of the text is out of date, the science is out of date. But she was looking at the list of double stars. And those lists are still pretty valid today because the majority of your double stars, visual doubles, are very slow as far as orbital motion. So I even used some guidebooks that were written back in the 1800s, and they're still reasonably accurate for some of these wide pairs even today. But anyway, he considers he says, considered as a collector of rare and precious things, the amateur astronomer has a great advantage over amateurs in all other fields who must usually content themselves with second and third rate specimens. For example, only a few of the world's meteorologists could hope to own such a specimen as a Hope Diamond. In contrast, the amateur astronomer has access to all types, at all times, to original objects of his study. The masterworks of the heavens belong to him as much as to the great observatories of the world. So that is one neat thing. We have the Orion Nebula just as well as anybody else, even Hubble.
So I decided to put, I know it's in the newsletter and it's on the event calendar, but I decided just to remind folks of the Friday, Saturday observing schedule for the next couple of months. So, well, there it is. So this weekend, if Steve were here, he'd remind us that about a year ago, we set up a schedule so that we would have the clubhouse open on Friday and Saturday night of the dark of the moon weekends. So last quarter-ish and new moon-ish weekends. And so this seems to be going pretty well. We have about 30, maybe about 30 volunteers that are on this schedule, and we'll redo it again in September it's already out to the end of 2023. We'll just kick it out another year and just keep things going like they're going. But there's the schedule. And just because it says last quarter moon doesn't mean the moon's going to really interfere. The 11th and 12th, it's a waning crescent moon. But there won't probably be anybody there 18th and 19th because that's the 100th anniversary of Stell thing. So we'll all be up there, and there's the rest of it. I know Rosh Hashanah comes up on September 15th, so that's why it says to be determined. But yes,
And
ma'am.
then September 23rd is the picnic,
And the September 23rd is the picnic. Okay,
observing.
should be good for observing. Perfect. All right, next slide, please. So highlights for July through September. I try to keep this short and sweet. You can look in the Royal Handbook and see when the moon will be near this and the moon will be near that, and that's all well and good. But to me, and hopefully for you as well, the highlights are these. At the end of July, Pluto will be in opposition at magnitude 14.5. If you've never been to the clubhouse, or if you've never seen Pluto, or both, come to the clubhouse and ask somebody to work the 25-inch telescope, to put Pluto in the telescope so you can actually see it. 14.5, that's a cakewalk for the 25-inch. So that's coming up at the end of July. And Pluto will be well placed in the sky through most of the early fall. So do that, please. The Perseid peaks on the 12th and 13th. The meteors on Saturday, August 12th, Venus as an inferior conjunction. So you're doing ongoing daytime observations, I hope. On Sunday, more about that in a minute. And Saturn reaches opposition on Sunday, August 27th. Next slide, please. So here's my planet roundup for the summer of 2023. It's supposed to be on one line, but Saturn is at opposition on August 27th, magnitude plus 0.5. Ring tilt this year is 8 to 10 degrees, so the ring's getting pretty narrow, pretty cool to look at it like that. Jupiter's near quadrature during early August. The next opposition is on November 3rd, and at quadrature, if you're trying your hand at daytime observations, when a planet or the moon is at quadrature, it's about 90 degrees away from the sun. And that's the region of the sky where the sky's natural polarizations max out. So if you're doing daytime observations of the moon at first quarter or last quarter, or if you're looking at planets near quadrature, if you use a single element polarizing filter screwed into your eyepiece, you can turn that filter to darken out some of the skylight. And it improves contrast for seeing these faint guys like Jupiter or Saturn in the daytime. It improves contrast nicely, so give that a try if you're so inclined. On July 15th, Jupiter rises around 1 in the morning, magnitude minus 2.3. August 15th, a month later, it's rising at 11 o'clock, minus 2.5 as it approaches its opposition. And there's the rest. Pluto, again, there it is. To see this, quote, dwarf planet. In my driveway, Pluto's still a planet, by the way. I don't know about anybody else, but I think it's still a planet. All right, next slide, please. Let's see how this one came out. All right, so Venus. Speaking of planets, I'm sure you've been noticing that Venus is getting lower and lower and lower in the western skies as the days and weeks are passing. And that's because Venus is approaching its inferior conjunction for 2023. Now, inferior conjunctions take place around every 19 months. So it's been a little while since the last inferior conjunction. This one is going to be especially easy to observe in the daylight sky because at conjunction on the weekend of August 12th and 13th, well, after you've woken up from your sleep after the Perseids, go outside and look for Venus in the daytime. It'll be 7.6 degrees south of the sun at magnitude minus 3.9. That's fabulous. The parent size is 58 arc seconds because it's close to the Earth, right? It's passing between us and the sun. But the best part is the view through a telescope, an unfiltered telescope, is Venus, you'll be looking at mostly the nighttime side of the planet. And so what you see in the daytime sky is this razor thin crescent. It looks fabulous. Now, this is a great inferior conjunction to try that because look, it's like 15 solar diameters away from the sun. You'd have to, on purpose, you'd have to sweep across the sun, right? That's 15 solar diameters away from the planet. So I would encourage you to start practicing now. Go out in the daytime and try and spot Venus. It's east of the sun now, so it's following the sun, so you don't have to worry about the sun getting in your way. After inferior conjunction, it'll be west of the sun, becoming the morning star. The sun will be following Venus, but because it's so far south of the sun, you really don't have to worry about the sun accidentally wandering itself into your eyepiece. Next slide, please.
So on the 12th, 13th, it's not a naked eye object, is it?
It won't be because it'll be so close to the sun. The sky will be just, you're almost looking straight at the sun. You'll see, we'll be up in Maine. I'll show
Right,
you.
we'll be up in Maine, but you said it was 7-point-something degrees away from the sun,
Yep,
right?
and minus 3.9. It's a little bit tricky to see it in the daytime like that with your eyes. I've never done it. I always find it with the telescope.
Okay, plus you said it was going to be a thin crescent, right?
Yeah, really thin.
Okay.
A fraction of a percent illuminated.
Yeah,
Fabulous. It looks fabulous.
we'll have fun up in Maine.
Oh, we will. So this is what's been going on, and the view to the west after sunset. And here, this is it. Where we were up here right now, right around here, right in here. I don't know if you've been looking at it, but it's nice crescent. But by August 1st, it looks like that, and it looks even better than that when it reaches inferior conjunction. So, next slide, please. So here it is. If you've got a polar aligned go-to, if you have a go-to or a push-to telescope, make sure it's polar aligned, and then you should be able to remember we're working in the daytime, right? There aren't a lot of guide stars to tell your telescope where it's looking. But if it's
there, if you can find them.
they're there if you can find them, right? A polar aligned equatorial mount, you can use the setting circles. And I use, most of my telescopes are Dobbs, so altitude azimuth angles for Dobsonian telescopes. Because if you're looking at Venus during solar conjunctions, whether it be inferior conjunction or superior conjunction on the other side of the sun, some safety precautions, shield your finder. The last inferior conjunction, I had a GSO 50 millimeter right angle correct image finder on my telescope. And I was off the mark of the sun, so I didn't think anything about it. I didn't think to close it off. And I was looking in the finder scope, and all of a sudden I saw these black clouds. And I was like, what black clouds are those? And I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, the finder's on fire. The plastic in the finder was actually burning inside. The wisp of smoke, I could see it, focused in the eyepiece, right? Crazy, right? So cover your finder. Use an aperture mask to minimize sunlight entering your telescope tube. When you get Venus that close to the sun, there will probably be sunlight shining into your telescope tube. And that's no big deal. Even if it's hitting the mirror, it's an off-axis reflection. But it produces a lot of glare in the tube. And so the way to get around that is to put an aperture mask on. You don't need a lot of aperture to see a -4th magnitude object. So put a 2-inch aperture mask on there and position it so that the sunlight hitting the inside of the telescope tube minimizes the internal reflections. You can use a lens shield, but it's a tangent function, and as the tangent of Venus's, as the angle gets smaller and smaller and smaller, the tangent of that little tiny angle goes towards infinity. So ultimately, you need a lens shield that's really long and impractical. So use the aperture mask. Pre-focus your telescope if you can. Not on the sun, please. Unfiltered telescope. On a really distant thing, or focus it the night before, and if you can put a mark on your focuser, so you know where it's in focus. The reason for that is in the daytime sky, even a -4th magnitude object, if your telescope's out of focus, you won't see it, because it'll just blend into that Bortle 24 sky you're looking into, right? That's what the daytime sky is around Bortle 24.
One thing I'm surprised you didn't mention, many people who have good eyesight can see Venus as a crescent, naked eye. The problem is the glare. So what you can do is use the polarizer at night while it's setting in the evening and turn it. That'll cut out the polarized light, and you'll be naked eye be able to see the crescent.
58 arc seconds.
Yeah,
Big.
not just that, even now, right now.
Yeah, big.
It's huge.
I used to ask my kids were little superb eyesight. I would ask them, look at Venus in the sky. Tell me what you see. What do you see? And they never told me it looks like the moon. So I don't think they could actually see it, but we weren't using anything special to try it, just little young eyes. Anyway. Wait, go back.
There we go. Sorry about
So
that.
use low power at first. The number 21 orange filter will improve contrast. Be aware. And perform, this kind of got messed up. Be aware of what you're doing, all right? I know you're 7.5 degrees away from the sun this time. But if you're ever playing this game when you're, say, 3 degrees away from the sun, be careful. Know where your telescope's pointed. Do minimal sweeping, because the last thing you want to do is have that open telescope pass over the sun when you're looking through it. Bad things happen.
I have a burned orange filter.
That's sometimes right. Yeah, if you have those glass filters will burn. I burned a polarizing filter one time because I forgot it was in the eyepiece.
Yeah.
Be very, very careful. All right, next slide. So this is the inferior conjunction on whatever date it's at for the 12th, and that's what it'll look like in the telescope. It's with a blue background, absolutely fabulous.
So that's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
Whatever it was. This was at the moment of inferior conjunction.
Oh, so it's 12:50 p.m.
Yeah, about a little before 1 o'clock on the 12th. There you go. All right, next slide. So these are some shots that I took. I'm not an astro imager, as you can see. These certainly aren't the pillars of creation. But there's Venus at one inferior conjunction, the next superior conjunction, and there's the next inferior conjunction. So that's what you can do with that. These are just iPhone handheld up to the eyepiece and squeeze off some shots. If you're going to try that, I always put it on video and just take a video of what the iPhone is seeing and move it around and jiggle it, get it to work, and then go back and pick the frames you like and screenshot them. So next slide, please. While we're talking about being out looking at the sun, don't forget to observe the sun. Right now, this is from yesterday morning. This is yesterday morning. That is an enormous sunspot on the surface of the sun right now.
That's what I think they saw. That's the one they saw on Mars, from Mars. And it's now coming around.
Yeah. That's the one that I think it was the Perseverance rover, takes a picture of the sun every day. And if you go on the NASA website, you can actually look at those pictures. And it saw that sunspot when it was on the other side of the sun from us, because of where Mars is placed. And so there are ways to look at the sun, right? I don't know if anybody's scared to look at the sun. Some people are. Again, you got to be careful. You can do projection if you don't have anything more sophisticated than that. You can use an aperture filter, whether it's from Bayer or AstroZap or Thousand Oaks, or a bunch of people make those. A bunch of companies make those. You can use a Herschel wedge. I like those. Those are nice. And you can see sunspot, speculate, and granulation. And again, that sunspot right there that's got to be 5 times the size of the Earth. That's a naked eye sunspot. If you held up your eclipse glasses to the sun, you'd be able to see that sunspot with your naked eye. Yeah.
Should mention the classic eyepiece filters, the little black glass that come in very cheap telescopes are not.
I have quite a few of these vintage refractors. They almost all come with that sun filter. And my instructions for people that have a filter like that is the best way to use it is to either find dense woods or, better, a swampy pond. Take that filter and throw it as far as you can. The woods, there's a chance you might find it again, but the swampy pond, forget it. That's the best way to use those solar filters. And then either do projection, and be careful with projection. If you've got a big aperture telescope out in the sun, you could destroy eyepieces. I mean, the coatings on those eyepieces might well burn.
Yeah, I'll be talking about that during my talk. So
but there are safer ways to do it. But those will work. If you have an H-alpha telescope.
The eyepieces with the oil might actually start bubbling up.
Or char. Yeah. It's nasty. Man, my 20-inch job has never been out in the sunlight because I'm too afraid that things will start to light on fire. Have you ever seen pictures of telescopes that burn to the ground because they were inadvertently pointed at the sun Dobsonians mostly? They burn right to the ground. You're just left with a messy mirror. That probably doesn't even work anymore. Anyway, next slide. This is my last slide, I promise, for now. H-alpha observing. This is a picture that Mario took last month, and it shows what you can see with an H-alpha telescope. Prominences along the limb of the sun, and prominences when they are in front of the sun, there are these things here called filaments. And you can see I'm going to call it the structure of the photosphere. Pretty nice. But these are specialized telescopes. They do cost a lot of money. Sub-angstrom bandwidth centered on the emission of hydrogen in the red light at 656.3 nanometers. Prominences, filaments, solar flares. If you don't own an H-alpha telescope and you want to look through one, if it's clear at the next work party, almost always somebody has an H-alpha telescope set up. And they'd be more than happy to show you what's going on the sun. So there's some stuff for daytime work. Do try to find Venus in the daytime, just to say you did it. It's easier than you think. And don't forget that the sun is up there too. There you go. So I think that's all I have for this section. So now you're on, because you've got the monthly challenge stuff.
all right, the one for July is NGC 6217. And it's right off the bowl of the Little Dipper. There's Polaris up there, the handle, and those are the 4 stars in the Dipper. It's right off of these 2 stars right here. That's Theta and Zeta Ursa Minoris. I found by star hopping, I started there and just worked my way over to it. Now last month was it 5774/5?
Yep.
What did you think?
Oh, awful.
Exactly. They were supposed to be about 11th magnitude. I couldn't see a thing. Now some of my resources say they're more like 12. This one's a different story. It's still kind of faint. It's 11.2, but I picked it up with my 10-inch scope. So
it's pretty easy to find too.
It's right off the bowl of Little Dipper. Okay, Doug Paul has an image. Doug, you're here. You want to explain?
Yeah, To tell you the truth, I forget. I was too busy preparing to talk to memorize the details, but it was probably 2-ish hours of
What did you use for an instrument? You use a 6-inch scope, right?
Well, I use a camera with a lens with a 6-inch aperture. It was probably shot at 1200 millimeter focal length.
Yeah, essentially a small scope type of thing. It's a wide spiral type of galaxy. This is, what I did is I got the closest ones and then we back out a little bit further out. Here's Mario's, and you can see the definite bar right there, and the central part. And Mario, your details on this?
Yeah, it was about 40 minutes of red, green, blue, and then I added H alpha. It added a little bit, but not much.
And it looks like there's a galaxy down in this part of the picture too as well.
Yeah, there's actually several in that
Yeah.
field.
And Chris, this is with MAO, right?
Yep.
Again, there's the bar. It's a nice galaxy.
It's a pretty little galaxy, you should definitely check it out. It's up all night.
Circumpolar. Oh yeah, galaxy right here. And just point out a couple things, just for comparison, because the next one is my sketch. I made a sketch with a 10-inch telescope, and you see the galaxy there, and there's a double star right up there. Those two. Wait, does this pointer work? Yeah, there we go, right there. And I think in my sketch, there they are, right there. And what I saw was the main part. Now I saw two different things. I either saw an oval smudge or two little stars. I kept seeing like a very faint, we're talking probably 12th, 13th magnitude, looked like two stars, and then I'd see the haze. So what I did, I didn't know exactly where the galaxy was. I had a pretty good handle, but I didn't know the orientation, so I made a sketch. And I did have, as you can see, I had to go backwards just a second here. You see the orientation. I sketched it relative to those two stars. It seems to be oriented, kind of pointing toward those two. Now if you look again at my sketch, and I basically got it. And with the two stars I saw, the central star is the nucleus of the galaxy. It's about 12.5, 13th magnitude. And there was a bright area in one of the bars, and that's the second quote-unquote star that I saw. So it is visible. This is with a 10-inch telescope, rather. Yes?
Len, could you go back to the wide field that Chris did and point out the stars in the Dipper?
Whoops, backwards, gonna go the
The
other
wider
direction.
view that, yeah,
Oh, I
that,
don't, you're not gonna
I don't
see-
think
you're
it
not
would
gonna
be
see the
there.
Dipper
that
stars.
wouldn't be in there, that,
No.
okay.
Yeah, because I think even this, what is this, about a 1-2 degree field maybe?
Can you go back to the previous one where you did point out the stars? I think it was a drawing or a
A chart, go back to the chart.
Chart. Yeah.
All right, here's a bowl of a little dipper right here. And that's theta and zeta, right? Zeta's right there. I forget what this one is, but it's about 2.5 degrees. It forms a triangle with these right here.
Just for reference, where's the handle go up? Okay, all right, got it now.
And you know what, I was talking to a member, Galevi, Maureen Galevi today, and she was interested in variable, I don't want to carry this too much because I've got to talk now, I don't want to keep myself until midnight here. But anyway, I showed her how to use the AAVSO website. You can make your own charts. They usually have them for variable stars. You can just put R. Leonis as a title to get your chart, but you can also put in the coordinates to make your own charts, and that's exactly what I did. Their A-type chart is a 15-degree field, and basically that's what you would get. You get stars down to about 9th magnitude. You go to the AB, and it's a 7-degree, and I think it's about maybe 9th magnitude. But anyway, what I did was I did the A chart to get basically what you see here, stars down to 9th magnitude. And then I was able to get this area right here on a B-type chart. And the final one that I used was a chart that went down to about 12th magnitude stars. I just wanted to be really sure I get stars were fainter than that galaxy is. Okay, continuing on, because we have a limited time, and we got some good speakers coming up.
Well, 2 out of 3.
Well, you'll all, I'm the last speaker, so they'll get you ready for bed. Next month, I apologize to Al, I didn't get this out in time to put it in the newsletter. I'll send it to Al, we'll have it in the September newsletter, it'll still be up. But it's the globular cluster M56 in
Wait, is
Lyra.
there anybody here who's never seen M56? Because it's oftentimes overlooked. It's a fabulous object to look at.
What constellation is it in?
It's
Lyra.
Lyra. And it's in a relatively small aperture. It's a misty glow and a beautiful star.
In fact, here's Lyra, and there's Gamma Lyra and Beta Cygni, so it's about midway between. And I was up at Stellafane one year near the clubhouse, and there's a guy named Chuck Scoville, who's a longtime AAVSO member, and I just happened to have a little telescope there, it was right by the pink clubhouse, and I found a comet. And I looked, I don't remember any Messier objects in that area. It was between Lyra and Beta Cygni. And I showed Chuck, and he's an expert, but sometimes there are things you're just not that familiar. We both thought this could be a comet. It'd be kind of neat to have a stellar-famed comet. But we went in the clubhouse, found the map right away. It's a Messier object, but it's a perfect example of Messier objects. It did look like a comet just without a tail. But anyway, that's the one for August. And we got Doug Paul's prelim picture. He's going to just take another one even better, or when we have the September meeting finally. But that's our target for September. And I believe,
It's August.
August rather. Oh, that's right, I did put the one in for August. This is NGC 6891. This is the August one, I'm sorry.
This is September.
Or September, that's right, September. And it's Planetary Nebula. This is Doug Paul's prelim picture right here, but that's coming up as well. And that one I'll send for the newsletter, I'm sorry. We got the one for July, we needed the one for August and September. Okay, any questions?
Look at how nice and green that nebulosity is.
Yeah.
That's fabulous. When you see that green color, that just begs you to put an Oxide 3 filter in your telescope.
Yeah.
Just to enhance it, because that's the emission of oxygen, forbidden transitions of oxygen.
Okay.
So that's a fun one. Still, it's pretty easy to find as well. You think that's it? Are we done? Oh, these are just the stats. So the July object, Kepler and Sander give it 3 stars. We talked about that last month. 56 and 6891, 4 stars. They're really nice objects to look at. They're relatively easy to find, and they're really fun to look at. You don't need a big telescope to see either one of those. So there you have it.
So with that, we'll introduce our first member speaker, which will be Mario Motta, and we'll be discussing the evolution of his imaging. So Mario will chronicle his pursuit in the best amateur imaging techniques throughout the years, from hypered Kodak 2415 film in the mid-80s to do-it-yourself CCDs to applying BlurXterminator over low-noise cooled CMOS data last week. Mario Motta, MD, is highly accomplished in both his medical career and his pursuits within amateur astronomy. For Dr. Mario Motta's research and contributions to combating light pollution, he's received numerous awards from many astronomical organizations, including the International Astronomical Union naming an asteroid 133537 Mario Motta. So please welcome Mario. This should be yours, and we have the clicker from Al.
Yeah.
So thank you to Al for
Thank you.
finding his clicker button, which is very
Can you
useful.
get rid of the pointer?
Thank you. I forgot to do that the first time around.
Okay.
Thank you.
Did the new members, you're from Houston, you said? What we had, the one with the mask? The gentleman with the mask on?
Newton.
Oh, Newton, I'm sorry, I thought you said. Okay.
They're close.
Well, anything west of Boston is fine. All right, so before I start, I just want Glenn to know that is Diane Hyken in here? She said she might, but she's not here. So there's going to be an article in Sky and Tell that I'm writing. In fact, like first draft is done. It's going to be in the February issue, and it's going to be on how to star hop to 16 best objects in the southern sky. Okay, so I figured you'd appreciate that.
Look forward to it.
The reason for it was I went to the Winter Star Party finally, my first one, because I'm retired, was able to go. And so there was all these groups of people with their telescopes. I go up to the first one, and they're looking at M42. I go, okay. So I go to another group, figure I want to see something different. They're looking at M42. So after the 500th view of M42, I got a little annoyed and said, don't you guys want to see something that you can't see from Boston? So you had all these people from Michigan, 4 or 5 right here from Massachusetts, from Maine, New Hampshire, all brought down this incredibly big telescopes, and they're all looking at M42, and it drove me insane. So I had this list of things that said, why don't you look at this object? Oh, great. So I pointed into like NGC 2997, some nice galaxies you can't see from here. And I did that all night long, and everyone was appreciative. I said, I'm going to write an article. Sky and Tell thought it was a good idea, and it's all star hopping to the best objects in the southern sky. And if anyone looks at M42, I promise I'm going to burn their telescope down. So, all right. So anyways, This talk was developed because people in Gloucester were interested in how I developed imaging, and Sal was kind of in the beginning of the curve of that as well. So I thought it just got me interested in digging out some of my own images. So you're going to see the worst of my career here, but you're going to see a steady improvement through the years. So step one, of course, is get a telescope. So this was my first big scope I made.
Is that your son?
What's that? That was the first big scope. That was at Stellafane, 1983. I actually ground the mirror while I was a resident and a fellow on weekends, and brought it up to the Stellafane. And visually it was fantastic. It's a great mirror. It's honest to God 16th wave. Paul Vallely testified to that. And this was my drive. I couldn't afford a real expensive drive, so I made one. And you can still find it online. It's called a cam drive. So you take basically a half-inch, long, yeah. And
Thread rod?
Yeah, rod. And you tap aluminum, and the curve is what's important, and it acts as if it's a curved line. And it worked great visually, not so great photographically, okay? You really do need a better drive system. So step one is have a better drive system, but that's taken through that telescope with that drive. Not so good. You need a good drive. Doesn't matter how great an optic you have, and that's a great optic. You can't get a good picture with a good drive. So the first major advance is good tracking. So after a few years of that trailer mount, which I used to bring up to the clubhouse and Mount Katahdin and stuff, I got a really good 16-inch buyer's drive, and that made a world of difference. But you still had to guide. And back then, there were no such thing as auto-guiders. It was all standing on a ladder and observing through a guide, well, up here, through a guide scope, through a lighted crosshair, and making hand corrections, like Hubble did in the cage way back then. But there was no auto-guiders back then. And with that, that was in my observatory in Winfield.
When I went to the Palomar Observatory in 1983
Yeah,
to visit, there was you go up to the observing chair in the prime focus.
yeah,
Okay. And first of all, there was a spring there that sticking up to poke the observer. But they used to put a graduate student up there. He'd sit there for 8 hours or something and basically guide.
yeah, you have to sit there. He didn't have a strong bladder or insert a Foley catheter.
That's right.
But so this was the first step. Was back then we had film. There was no CCDs. My first attempts were with Tri-X, and my first attempts with color with Provia Fujichrome, and those were fine. And for the time, I thought it was great. And here's the first attempt. One of my first pictures with actual better tracking. I mean, now you can tell the difference. The stars sort of look like stars, a little bit elongated because you're still doing it by hand for corrections. But I mean, you can see that it's in 51, not quite what we're used to these days, but at the time, I thought this was great. Okay, then I learned the proper time and exposure, and with the same technique, I was able to get a little better image. Okay, tracking's better. That was the first major advance. And the image is okay for film. Okay. And, you know, like 2997, yeah. I love this galaxy, low in the sky. And that was my first color picture, M42. Back then, it was a new object for me, okay?
Burn it down.
After you see it 10,000 times, I want to look at something different. Okay, so the next major leap, And some of the older amateur astronomers here who imaged, I know like Al, know what I'm talking about. And that was hydrogen hypering. And I thought this was God's gift to amateur astronomers. So you took Kodak 2415. So the problem with TechPan, it was 400 ASA for those old enough to know what ASA means. And this was 100 ASA, very fine grained film. It was actually called technical copy film for making perfect copies. But it's very slow. It's only 100 ASA. What you did I? Yeah, okay, I did put a picture of that in. So I had this tank of hydrogen gas, okay, and you'd pump it into this chamber, which then heated to 50 degrees centigrade.
Actually, Mary, you forgot one step. Vacuum. You had to vacuum it
Yeah,
out.
you had to vacuum it out, that's correct. And that's what this up here is for. You pump out the air, then close it, thank you, and then put in the gas and heat it to 50 degrees. And you had to experiment because everyone's system was different. For me, it was 18 hours exactly after many failed experiments. And in a darkroom, you loaded up the film. I got 100-foot rolls. And then, so you cook it for 18 hours, you leave it in the chamber, and then if you think it's a good night, you go in the darkroom, put the film out of there into a regular roll to put into a camera, and it was good for probably 24 hours, right? And if you screwed up and it wasn't a good night, you just lost all that effort and you had to start all over again.
What it is, it's cosmic rays would actually fog the film within 24
Right.
hours.
But, and the gas was, I had one tank, and I was looking around to where I can get gas, and Dennis DeChico happened to say, I got this plenty of gas. It turned out he had this tank, literally 10 feet high, which he obtained. I don't know where he got this thing from, but he had enough gas to last 15 lifetimes, so he didn't mind giving me free forming gas. So once a year, I'd go over his house and fill up my tank, and it was sufficient for me. So I never bought gas, thanks to Dennis. And the first attempt, it was so good, it overexposed. Okay, so you had to use M101. So good, it overexposed. So finally I learned the right exposures. Now you can see that it's better than the initial attempts. You can start seeing a little bit of detail, and I thought, this is great. We're finally online with the pros, right? And here's M101. Okay, and Sal, see this little thing here? That's what I thought you got. Because I've been seeing that spot all my life on M101 as far back as 1985. All right, but then when Sal had showed me this pre-exposure picture of the recent supernova, and what I did finally, because there was a question whether it was this or it was really a pre-exposure of the supernova, I finally shrunk it and made it exactly the same, rotated it, and blinked it. Had to blink it multiple times. But in fact, Sal did have a pre-exposure of the supernova, and this other thing was just slightly offset. So congratulations.
Thanks. So what I want to say is I want to thank you for going through a lot of extra effort. You did. So because of that, everything changed. So I appreciate that you made the effort to look for the truth. So I congratulate you.
But when you first showed it to me, I thought it was this thing.
Right.
Okay, and the problem with hypering is sometimes you get fog. So I'm showing you all my failures so you understand why we ended up where we are. But on the other hand, here's a ring. It's a reasonable picture of the ring back then.
Mario, you either win or learn. Okay? So you've learned a lot.
So the next step was getting a bigger optic. So here's my first 32-inch that I ground. And that was up in New Hampshire.
Right.
So my first 32. It's now owned by Arnie Hendon, who it was kind of funny. He was at my house up there, and this was 2005, 4, somewhere around there. I was just finishing my new 32 for Gloucester, And because all the kids were grown up and moved, and my wife wanted to spend some time in Florida, eventually decided we'd probably sell New Hampshire. All that was going up was do lawn keeping. So Arnie was having dinner with me, and he goes, I'm going to retire in a year or two, and I want to find a place just like this, put up a scope just like this, have a house on a lake just like this. And my wife was looking at me and said, we're thinking of selling. Sold. So Arnie now owns this telescope, and hope he's using it well.
He bought the house and everything,
He
right?
bought everything, lock, stock, and barrel. I didn't have to take anything apart, which was great. But I keep reminding him, this is a 32-inch, and the one in Gloucester is 32 1/4. So I still have the largest scope in Oregon. That's important. So visually, it was great, and it tracked fairly well. But the third revolution is just as I was completing that telescope, and it was showing first light, CCD chips. I remember Richard Berry?
Yeah.
Okay, so I decided I'd build my own chip. So here it is, the CCD camera cookbook, and I went whole hog. I went for the 4x6mm chip. That was the big one, as opposed to the 3x4mm chip.
4x6.
Okay, I figured with a big scope, I needed a really big chip. Nowadays, the guide scope cameras are much bigger than that, right? But I spent a few months building it, and I actually used it for a while. Here's a picture with that first chip. I think this is through my 6-inch, not through the 32, because here's a picture of M42. And you can tell it's a CCD chip because we got bloom.
27.
What?
That's M27.
Yeah, M27. What did I say? Anyways, it's...
M42 is what
Yeah,
you
that's
said.
right.
Is that the fire
starting, Mario?
Yeah, so you see these bloom, and that was the problem with CCD, but that's okay. We learned to live with that as long as you got a picture. So now we're working with the pros, but actually did good science with that. Right here is this one right here. That is a gamma ray burster, okay? It's 21.5 mag through the 32-inch. Now the field of view is small, that's the problem with this tiny chip, but I was able to do science with it, real science for the first time with CCDs. So here is a gamma ray burster that was used in science. You know, like all CCD chips, it has flaws. Eventually sold that at Stellar Fame and got my first, now this is my newest scope, but that's the first camera I got. It's a ATMoB, and it was a, I'm trying to think, a 14x16mm chip, which at that time was huge. And I used it up in New Hampshire. And then when I first had this scope in Gloucester in 2005, I had it for a couple of years before I got my new camera. And again, ATMoB worked pretty well. Now I was able to get a bigger field of view. So this is another major advance, bigger CCD chips. And you can see the quintet. Okay, the problem with CCD chips is, the old ones, is if you try to go for something faint like 6888, you got stars that bloom, and that was a problem. So how do you get better pictures when you get such blooming over the object that you're trying to image?
Is that single integration? One integration?
Yeah, well, it's stacked even back then, but it was stacked in Photoshop, which isn't very great. The integration it was anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes. I don't remember what that one was. But here is the dumbbell, a little bit green, but I started using color filters back then. So, but eventually get the hang of it, and the pictures are starting to look better and better with the with that ATMoB, right? It looked, I mean, compared to the first M51 image you saw, you can start to see some detail. Here's 101, and there's that object again. Like I said, I've been looking at that object for years. So eventually built the new 32, that's the new mirror, in the current scope I've been using, and it's better optics. And I got a new SBIG 1001E, and that's a 24.5 by 24.5 millimeter chip. And I said, this is it. It can never get better. So Photoshop learned how to do stacking properly, and it'll try to remove all the blooming and all the defects. And it's starting to get better. So here's before without eliminating the blooming, and after. Now you can eliminate the blooming to a higher degree, and the images are starting to look more and more modern and a little bit better. I'm very happy at the time going from this to that, right? It's another significant jump. So off-axis guiding, all my guiding problems are solved. Before I was using, but then I went to on-axis guiding with the S-Big, but I didn't like it. Field of view is too small, so I still stayed with off-axis guiding. And here's how I did it with an off-axis guider. And it worked. It got better.
Much better.
Much better, right?
Yeah, a lot.
So that was the next major advance. Problem is, when you went down near the horizon, okay, so things are better. Here's N13. Stars are nice and sharp. And I'm saying, I'm there. It'll never get better. I've said that many a time in my life. So the Ring Nebula is now better. The mice, right? So I'm starting to get some really deep sky stuff. Those are fairly faint. And just to put things in perspective, this is Hubble's picture with V1 up here, which he thought was a nova at first, right? And notice those three stars. So that's what he took with the Hooker telescope way back in the 1920s, speaking of 100 years. And here's what my 32-inch, the same three stars and the same V1, which I did for an AVSO project.
Can you go back?
That's film on plate.
Right, 100 years ago.
100 years ago.
Yeah.
His blue sensitive plate, which he had to prepare. Okay, so he had to do it in a dark room, take a glass disc, spread the emulsion on it, let it dry, bring it out to the observatory, spend all night holding his urine in the cage, guiding, and...
Mario, that's a 100-inch scope.
Huh?
The hook is a 100-inch.
100-inch scope, that's correct. But
Those two stars in the upper right that are marked are also on your photo?
Oh, well, my field of view is like this big.
Okay.
But just to show you the advance, now amateurs can get a close-up like this and easily get that V1. So things are much better. I'm very happy. I'm saying, wow, I'm there. It'll never get better. Then on-axis guiding came. And it can get better because this gentleman here, Mr. Godot, he's French, but he lived in Philadelphia at the time. He moved to Ohio, and he runs Farpoint. So out of the blue, he gives me a call saying, I've got this new way to do on-axis guiding instead of off-axis guiding, but I need a scope to test it on. Can I come up? I go, sure. So he comes up and has this, this is serial number 2. He had serial number 1. And he actually gave it to me at the end. We spent the weekend testing it out and taking pictures with it. And I was skeptical. He said, pick something difficult. So I'm saying, okay, what do I always have trouble with? Something low in the sky because it bounces around. So I was never able to get a great picture of M83. So I said, we're going to go for M83. You get a good picture of that on my scope, I'm completely sold on it. So here's before. This is with off-axis guiding because M83 is like 15 degrees above the horizon. And, you know, you look at the stars, they're bouncing around. And if you're doing an off-axis guider, it's really hard to track on it. That's before? No, that's before. Okay, that's before. This is on the old scope. This is with off-axis guiding on the new scope. Get better. What happened to it? Where's the new one? I think I put something out of line. It'll come up. Okay, so I don't know what happened to it. Anyways, I think it's, I must have put it out of shape. CMOS comes along, okay, and now the bleed artifacts are gone, the line defects are gone, and I'm very happy with it. In fact, I used to have to, in processing, get rid of the dark frames, get rid of the bias. I don't even bother doing that anymore with the CMOS chips. I don't know what you're doing with your CMOS cameras, but I do flat frames, and that's all I really need because the dark and the bias is so minuscule in the CMOS chips, and there's no glow. So, oh, here it is. That's out of place. Sorry. That was the first picture I took with the on-axis guiding.
Big difference.
I mean, it just was night and day. That to that. Same camera, couple of nights apart. So I said, wow, okay, you've totally convinced me. On-axis guiding is the way to go because it's following the same path as as what you're imaging. So I was quite happy with it. So next revolution was PixInsight. How many people here know how to use PixInsight for processing? Okay. Anyone processing without it? Okay.
I haven't used it.
This is the way to go. Okay. It's the reason it's so good is not only is it now mature, but it's open architecture, so anyone in the world can improve it by putting in a unit that does some new trick. And consequently, it's constantly being improved, and you have free updates for life after you buy it. Okay, and it's a steep learning curve, and it took me about a year to really understand it. But once you learn how to use it, you'll never go back to Photoshop, which is, in comparison, is a piece of junk. This is the way to go. So things are starting to get better. PixInsight processing and on-axis guiding, and I'm saying it'll never get better. Okay, so this is, yeah, that's actually before. Then with PixInsight, I'm starting to learn how to get better imaging. So this is with Photoshop, this is with PixInsight. I think you can see an improvement, right? You can control the colors better, you can control the processing better. I just think it's a better image. Then this comes along, BlurX. First time I tried it, my jaw hit the floor, and I could not believe how much it improved things. So this is a major revolution. You don't need...
What does it do? What is BlurX?
I'm going to show you. What it does, if you know what deconvolution is, okay, I played with deconvolution through the years, but sometimes it makes things worse. It creates ring artifacts, and if it improves the center of the field of view as you deconvolve, it might worsen the edge, or if it improves the edge, it might worsen the center. So it's not all that great. It's good in some cases, it's not that great in other cases. What BlurX does is it breaks it up. It's an AI program, analyzes the field and breaks it up into 6 fields, and will process this separately from the center and from this side, so it'll actually fix different sections of it all at once. And it takes a little bit longer, but what comes out is a much better image. So I got to redo this one. I don't like it when it looks like Christmas lights. But that is the same thing, M83 with BlurX. Everything is just sharper. So here is M51 with BlurX. Compared to before, everything is just sharper. Here's
It's 101.
that's 101. This is before, and then with BlurX. Okay, notice the stars right there. They're just sharper, and that's the main difference. And you get with the combination of PixInsight, BlurX, better tracking, on-axis guiding. You start getting very sharp stars, better detail, all around, I think. So here's another before and after. So here is data from a few years ago with the Thor's helmet. The same data I went back and reprocessed,
Oh, nice.
okay, with BlurX.
So that's the same image.
Same image,
Wow.
okay? I just reprocessed it. So I took the original subs, redid it, and I get this out of it. Now you understand why I think BlurX is,
So it's a sharpening program?
it's a deconvolution program.
What does that mean?
Thank you for asking that.
Stars, as they go through the atmosphere, will blur due to going around. When you're taking a 5-minute sub, the star isn't going to be the pinpoint star that you can observe. It's going to be a 5-minute
Blur.
blur of
Got it.
where the star was as it's going through the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Okay, and every other part of the image is the same thing.
Right.
So what deconvolution does, it takes, imagine this is a blurred star, it'll take that blurred star and through a set of iterations, bring it back down to what it should be as if it was in outer space. Deconvolution, which you found in numerous programs, was pretty good, but it had a flaw that it tried to do the whole image at once. BlurX beauty is that it breaks it up into sections, and it's just a better algorithm. Yeah,
Are you applying that on all of your subs, or are you applying it on your?
I stack the subs, and then I apply it to each of the red, the blue, the green, and the loom separately, and then I stack those together.
So, do you ever see your family anymore?
His advantage is that the observatory is in his house.
Yeah. So here's a way back picture from 1985. Picture, I think, in the 1990s. Picture in the early 2000s. And now. Okay,
Ouch.
exactly. I mean, every time I think, now I'll say it again. I don't think it can get any better, but I'll be proved wrong within 2 years, I promise you.
Right.
But it's getting pretty close to hard to improve. I mean, when you got cameras that have 90% efficiency, you're collecting 9 out of every 10 photons. There's not a lot of room to go up, right? So the only thing you can improve on is the optics. My optics are pretty good, and the tracking's not pretty good. So the processing is the only thing that can improve at this point. If you got really good optics, a good size scope, and 90% quantum efficiency in your camera, the only thing you can improve is the processing. And the processing now is damn good.
Are you using that same camera that we have in MAO, the 62?
I have a ZWO 6200, but it's the same chip.
Same chip, right, okay.
Yeah, it's the same chip. So just, here's N13 way back when. Here's N13 around 2005, I think, or 2006. I thought, wow. Here's from just the last month.
Unbelievable.
Okay, the stars are incredibly sharp.
You're still using that on-axis guider?
Yeah, all my photos are with that. I mean, for a small scope, you don't need it, but for a large scope, it's night and day.
Can you put an on-axis guider on a refractor?
What's that?
Can you put an on-axis guider on a refractor?
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I mean, I tried off piggyback, but no matter how much you try, and I have my own machine shop, there's no such thing as getting rid of mechanical flux. It just cannot happen. So on-axis guiding is the way to go. So here's way back when. Here's, I think, a month and a half ago.
I can't recognize it because it doesn't look anything like
I
the
know.
traditional
I know,
images.
but that's because I was going for the Sauda stuff, which I could never see before.
Whoa.
4565. I mean, the level of detail, I think, is phenomenal. It's one of my favorite galaxies.
Actually, if you look at the image on the monitors above, you have better dynamic range.
Yeah, it's kind of blurred out with this here. And 6888, remember that very faint thing you could barely see way back when? Okay, look at it now. I mean, not only do you get that outer, but you got all the stuff in between. You can see the jet coming out of the Wolf-Rayet star in both directions, but especially in this direction. And you can see this outer rim of material, which is mostly oxygen. Okay, night and day. The Whale Galaxy can add on H-alpha data to the galaxy. And one I took last month, the Trio and Draco. I mean, I could never get detail like that even just a few years ago. And look at all the faint galaxies in the distance. These, half of these dots are galaxies. That's a galaxy over here. Why is it moving?
Is that the last?
Okay, is that it? Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
So I'll say again, it can't get any better.
Any Q&A for you? Or? Thank you, Mario. That was incredible. To see the progress in 40 years, who knows what we'll have in another 40.
Yeah, come back in another 40.
So our next speaker will be Doug Paul, and his talk will be about choosing camera gain or ISO. So he'll describe the architecture of the camera and a method for choosing the best camera gain or ISO for stacked image. Doug Paul is a retired electrical engineer with a specialization in signal processing. About 5 years ago, he purchased a tracking astromount, which opened the deep sky to him. Since then, he's been imaging DSOs, about 500 to date, and improving his processing software. He uses standard camera lenses, extenders, and DSLR, MLR bodies for his DSO imaging, and he has written his own data acquisition and part of his own imaging processing. So please welcome Doug Paul.
Camera gain is a topic that, well, I just searched cloudy nights recently, and the quote-unquote experts are all over the place. People don't really know what they're doing. And I ran across a presentation which you know, tells you in a very meaningful sense, gives you good guidelines. So that's what I'll go into. So I'll start with the, well, that was a bit of the introduction. I'll start with the camera signal architecture, and then how do we figure out the optimum gain, and then show some examples from 2 cameras and a couple sample images, and summarize and give you a few references. So the question addressed here is, what's the optimum gain, or ISO, for stacked astro imaging? This analysis is due to Roger N. Clark at his website, which I highly recommend. Roger Clark is co-investigator on a number of NASA projects, an expert in imaging, and he's a good amateur astrophotographer as well. And I'm only going to refer to the actual gain, or ISO, here. That's normally expressed as the quantization step size, electrons per dn or ADU. dn or ADU is just the quantization step size. They're both the same thing. So and I'm not talking about the gain calibration curve. You can get that from a manufacturer. I believe SharpCap can generate one for you, or you can do it pretty easily manually. I'm talking about the real gain, not the control parameter. And ISO is linear in gain, but you still need a conversion factor to get the true gain. And this analysis applies to both CMOS and CCD cameras. So here's your camera signal architecture. You start with the sensor, with or without color filters. Feed it through an amplifier, add an offset, and then it goes to the ADD converter, and then you get your raw output here. The photoelectrons are, of course, stored in quantum wells on the individual pixels, converted to a voltage, and that goes through the rest of the chain. The photoelectrons have a Poisson distribution, and the well capacity is actually pretty much proportional to your pixel area. Typically 1,700 to about 3,000 electrons per square micron. So if a manufacturer is touting his big full well capacity, it just means he has a big pixel. Also, the only sensor control you have is the exposure duration. Setting the gain and so forth, that's all done in the amplifier. So we maintain, in analyzing it, we maintain the fiction that that everything is noiseless, and we add and we lump it all as a read noise here. So even noise from the A to D conversion gets mapped back there. The sensor has thermal noise. The photons, of course, have their own noise. That's a Poisson. That's the Poisson distribution. That's separate. So the sensor thermal and amplifier noises have Gaussian distributions. The A to D converter has a uniform distribution, and the effective read noise varies with the gain. And as I said, it's referred to the amplifier input that is measured in electrons. The maximum dynamic range of a CMOS sensor is about 14.5 EV. EV is a photographic unit, meaning a factor of 2. So it's 14.5 stops if you prefer. And I found a reference for a CCD sensor going up to about 16 stops, dynamic range. So the real gain, well, to me, gain is this is a multiplier, and so you put an input voltage in, and it's multiplied by the gain to get the output. So the real gain is actually dN, or quantization steps per electrons, and we treat this as a unit here. So it's electrons in and A to D steps out.
Doug, what's the offset? I never understood.
Okay. The reason for the offset is that your signal here is non-negative. It's a count of the number of photons. So, and that would be fine. You don't need the offset then because it never goes below 0. However, by the time you add noise to that, it can go below 0. And now when you average, if you're trying to average out to get your either a weak signal or noise or your noise level, then you've clipped your signal and you can't get a proper average. So I won't talk about the offset in any detail in this talk, but that's why the offset is there. My Canon camera bodies have built-in offset. The Astro cameras that I've looked at have a user settable offset.
That's the bias that you're adding?
Oh, well, that
Shifts all the signal.
well, bias actually encompasses something else as well. The individual pixels vary in their 0 points. So the bias measures that plus the offset.
Okay.
So, but of course, offset is constant for all pixels.
It just adds a number across.
That's
to make
right.
Sure you don't get a negative.
You effectively add a voltage here before the A to D converter to prevent negatives.
Trade-off is dynamic range.
Well, you lose a small amount out of the top, but not that much. So the traditional electrons per quantization step size is actually an inverse gain. That's so the real gain would be 1 over that. ISO is proportional to real gain. So sorry, some of the numbers are in real, some are in inverse. It's just the conventions. Also, the base gain of a camera is when the sensor output range is approximately equal to the A to D input range. So So both the sensor and the A to D saturate at about the same input level. That's typically ISO 100 for a terrestrial camera body, and for an astro camera, or at least the small number of them that I've dealt with, it's basically at or near minimum gain control setting. You can measure that if you so desire. So some gain trade-offs. This is for the Canon RA, but it's pretty much universal. That for a low ISO, your quantization step size is large. In this case, ISO 100, 4.6 electrons per step size. The read noise is fairly large, but the dynamic range is at its maximum. However, this gives you poor stacking. Medium, which for this camera would be an ISO of 1600, gives you a quantization step size of 0.29 electrons per DN, a read noise of 1.4, and a dynamic range of 11.3. That, well, I'm jumping ahead, but that turns out to be the optimum.
Why is the stacking bad at low ISO?
Because your quantization step size is so big that you have, that your quantization noise messes up your stacking.
Okay.
That's something which does not seem to be well appreciated in the, at least the amateur astro community. And then let's go to high ISO. Your quantization step size is very small. Your read noise is at a minimum, but the dynamic range is greatly reduced. So there your penalty is that you've thrown away a lot of your dynamic range. So also the large step sizes, low ISO, can also cause correlated noise, which may not average out, and that can be devastating. In audio, if you quantize to a small number of bits, what you'll hear is distortion plus noise. If you then get rid of the correlated noise by a technique called dithering, what you then hear is white noise with clear audio. It does can make a significant difference. And some cameras, particularly some of the older cameras, have banding at low ISOs, so you'd like to avoid that. So the optimum gain, this is the part that's due to Roger and Clark. Ideally, you want the largest A to D step size to maintain your dynamic range that is small enough that the quantization noise does not damage your stacking and obscure weak signals. So this would give you the best weak signal recovery with a minimum loss of dynamic range. Clark presents this on his webpage. This is my replication of it. So this is the number of electrons, 100 subs, Poisson distribution for the photoelectrons, read noise plus dark current has a Gaussian distribution of 3 electrons, and uniform A to D noise distribution. So this is the A to D step size here, 2 electrons per DN down to 0.2, and then for normalization, then no A to D. And across here, it's the number of electrons per sub-exposure. So if you have 2.5 electrons per sub-exposure, which is of course 250 total electrons once you stack all 100 subs, everything's fine. But if we go to say 0.3 electrons for a total of 30 electrons once it's stacked, you can see how that step size makes a big difference. And if we push it down to 0.1 and 0.2, you can see that you basically reach limiting performance at 3 electrons per step.
That's interesting, because if you go to the ZWO manufacturer's site, they say the unity gain is 200. Okay, and I tried that, and then I decided to experiment, and it turned out 0 gain wasn't any good. 200 gain was okay, gave pretty good images, But I found 100 was best for my system. I've since been using gain of 100. I'm
Okay.
not sure where it fits.
Okay, those numbers that you're giving me, I presume, are the control parameter numbers,
Right.
not the actual gain in the camera. It's, what you're saying runs somewhat counter to this analysis, so.
Well, no, because
No.
it's a lower gain, and
No.
it gave me a better.
That's an inverse gain you're talking about.
Okay.
So that basically, well, unity's here, you are going up to around here.
What's the source of, you said these are sources that I can read, right? There's some.
The references, there's a set of references at the tail end, it's in that.
Okay. Good.
ClarkVision.com.
In this graph, the larger number would be the lower gain of
This,
the
as you go down,
ASI.
it's a smaller step size,
Therefore, a larger gain.
Yes.
therefore a larger gain,
So
that's
in
right.
ASI, as you crank up what they call the gain, their number, you're going down this graph.
Yeah, it's, well, I haven't looked at the, well, I don't have any ZO cameras, I have some QHYs, and they show plots of gain control number and, electrons per DN, and those curves are diminishing curves as the control number goes up. Yeah, it's, again, sorry about the confusion of the, proportional numbers versus the inverse numbers, but those are the conventions. For comparison, here is no A to D converter, and here is no A to D converter with no read noise. So this is your perfect system. But you do reach approximately limiting performance around 0.3. So,
For each camera, you have to figure this out.
no, this is independent of the camera model.
Yes.
This,
When you get a camera model, you have to figure out what this is good, how this relates to it.
I'm sorry,
When you have to pick a particular camera, you have to figure out how this
oh,
relates.
yes, you have to figure out what control setting gives you
Exactly, okay.
this. And this includes the quantization noise and the stacking process. I've seen articles about it, well, one was in Pentapixel, a camera magazine, and they analyzed all this stuff, but they never paid any attention to the quantization error or the stacking afterwards. They were looking at it as taking individual pictures, which gives you the wrong conclusion. Unity gain, as you can see, does not work out well, but it's, shall we say, unduly popular. Okay, analysis of a specific camera. This is the Canon 90D, which has a 3.2 micron pixel and a full wall capacity of 26,000 electrons and a 14-bit ADD. So ISO, this is the saturation number of electrons. Each time you double the ISO, if you, at the start, 100 is unity gain, so the full span of the sensor matches the full span of the ADD. You double the gain, so now the top half of the sensor saturates the ADD, so you've thrown away the top half, and then you have the bottom half, so that's why the saturation number of electrons is diminishing as the ISO goes up. And this is the number of electrons per DN, and here's the optimum on that. So you come out with an ISO of 800, 1.7 electrons of read noise, and 11 EV of dynamic range. And the data for this camera is from photons to photos. So 800 is the best for the ADD. You can also do this as an equation written here, and it comes out with 537 as the.
So Doug, you're saying that your best bet is to look for electrons per quantization at about 0.3?
Yes.
And to base it on that, because ZWO does give those numbers. You can
Yes.
actually work back and give. and
I've
get-
seen them, I've seen calibration curves for QHY. As I said, I haven't looked at ZO, but
Yeah, you can,
I'm not
you
surprised
can get
they...
that out of their
Sure.
data that they get.
Or by starting at base ISO, you can determine where by adjusting your exposure time, you can determine saturation, and then you can use ratios in your exposure time to basically step your way up and make your own curve.
And that's true for any CMOS sensor that you're looking for that number,
CMOS or
or CC.
or CCD.
Okay.
The sensor technology doesn't enter in.
How does photons and photos get their data?
He measures a lot of it directly off the cameras. He's got a whole website with a lot of data about the cameras. In particular, I was looking at the input referred read noise.
Yeah.
So, however, he does not cover astro cameras. So this is the Canon RA, which is a larger pixel. It's a 5.4 micron pixel and a 75,000 electron saturation. And everything else is the same as the previous slide. So the best comes out at ISO 1600. So basically, if you have a 14-bit A to D converter, which is very common on terrestrial, good quality terrestrial cameras these days. If you have a 5-ish micron pixel, 1600 is the optimum. If you have a closer to 3 micron pixel, then 800 is the optimum. And if you run the equation, then you come out with 1527.
The bigger the pixels, the higher ISO you can use.
That's right. And if you look at the QHY 600, it has a 16-bit A to D, which enables you to use a much lower gain.
Sure.
Okay, so here's the equation version again. It's just full well capacity divided by 0.3 times the number of A to D converter levels. So ultimately, the optimal ISO depends primarily on the pixel area and the number of A to D levels. There are exceptions. For instance, apologies to Mario, for M42, the trapezium is so bright that you'll saturate the entire area if you expose as you would for a dimmer deep sky object. So I had to reduce my exposure by 5 stops to reduce the saturation. Now, if I'd kept my usual ISO, that would have meant 4-second exposures. So instead, I reduced the ISO down to 200, and my exposure from my normal is 120 seconds down to 30. That's with a 600 millimeter focal length lens, or if you prefer, 150 millimeter lens, f4. Other exceptions are that you might want to increase the ISO to reduce the read noise for a dim object with no bright spots. And if you're doing lucky imaging, there are other constraints which may push you away from the optimum. And these are 2 examples. This one was, the one on the left was done with, at the optimum ISO setting, Horsehead Nebula and the like. And this, again, same apologies, is at 2.3 electrons per dn. So you don't have to be exactly on the optimum. It's fairly tolerant. You can go off by a good bit. However, one thing I didn't try was shooting this at the optimum gain setting with and just letting that region saturate, just to see how well it would do in the outer sections. That'd be an interesting experiment for me to do someday when I don't have anything else to image. And so in summary, the best ISO gain for stacked images occurs at the A to D step size of 0.3 electrons per DN, too high in ISO or lower electrons per DN, waste dynamic range, and too low in ISO or high electrons per DN gives poor signal recovery. And the best ISO depends on the number of A to D bits and the full well capacity. So again, it's for terrestrial cameras, it's about 800 for small pixel cameras and 1600 for larger pixel cameras, both assuming 14-bit A to D. So a couple of references. Here's Roger Clark. This is the specific web page that he presents that simulation on. I highly recommend that. He's got something like 80 articles on dark sky or low light or nightscape and deep sky imaging. I highly recommend reading the whole thing. Someday when you have a month and nothing useful to do. And he does have a segment on nightscape photography, which deals with a lot of the dark imaging stuff. Photons to Photos by William Claff, who's actually in the Boston area. And in specific, I used the input referred read noise here. And I put a number of, about 200 of my images out on a website, pretty much all of which were done with this, at this 0.3 electrons per DN gain setting. There's also a link to my presentation on astrophotography for the Bedford Center on Arts photo group. So it's astrophotography for photographers. Yeah, that covers a lot more ground than this. And in fact, this talk is a subset of that. Skip the first half hour. It's just old images. The images on the website are better, and then the remaining portion is the technical. So.
Now, are these slides available at some point for a screen? Because you've got wonderful organization of the information, and of course we can go and dig it out from this also.
Well, I don't have these available anywhere. I suppose I could put them on my website. The other is...
This is recorded.
They will be in the video.
That means you have to watch the video.
Jump in. Meeting video. You can skip me and go directly to this.
Or if you want the history, you can go to his and skip mine. So anyhow, that's, as I said at the beginning, I think that this is not a topic that's well appreciated in the amateur astro community, and I think it might be helpful.
So as I told you, most of the time with 6200 I do 100 gain. I don't know what the numbers mean, but it just seems to work better for me for 90% of the images. If I know I'm going something really faint, like 18th, 19th mag galaxy for a project, I may ramp it up to 400 gain, whatever that number that means. I don't know what it means by electron. But if I know I'm going for something really bright, I mean, like M42, something similar, I may lower it to 50 or 40 gain. Is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do?
Oh, I think that's reasonable. In my case, with my dinky little 6-inch aperture, I can reach mag 19 in 2 hours using the 0.3. I don't think you really gain much in ability to get to image dim objects by going to higher ISO. Maybe a stop worth it. But you're reducing your read noise a little bit. So you get limited. Well, in the one camera, I showed 1.7 electrons of read noise at the optimum ISO and 1 at max ISO. So there isn't that much to gain. Certainly, when it's brighter, you either have to go to high dynamic range techniques, take several different exposures to get the bright stuff and some images and the dim stuff and then combine them. That's another way around it. If you're just shooting a single exposure for the whole thing, then yes, if it's too bright, then it's going to saturate. Well, you have no choice but to reduce the exposure. Although, of course, you could do that. How many hundred 4-second exposures you want to take of M42? That might be a little over the
To get
deep
the
end.
core, I took exactly 100 1.5 second exposures.
Yeah, that's not surprising. However,
What the
at that,
game turned out.
right,
Well, I was gonna
at that
suggest the
point,
same thing.
your read noise might accumulate to be enough of a problem.
So I was going to say the same thing he did. You're using PixInsight. Have you learned the HDR composition tools?
But if it's saturated, you can't recover from that.
Well, no, the composite, not the one which does the after the one which you combine short exposures with long exposure into the same.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, oh, sure. No,
Yeah.
the HDR gets you out of the problem, of course.
Yeah, because
You can't recover from saturation.
but you can use the same gain, but use the different exposure lengths
Yeah,
to
exactly.
combine them. Yeah.
Sure. And in fact, it may make sense to use the same gain when doing HDR because so that they match better when you line them up. So, anything else or any other questions? Okay, well, either everybody understands everything or nobody understands everything.
Thank you, Doug.
Corey, I'll do a 2-minute sneak preview if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm scheduled next, there's a line of thunderstorms coming in, it's getting kind of late, so we can put the first slide up anyway. I was going to do a counterpoint, visual observing versus CCD photography or imaging, but I just want to bring this in. This is a telescope that I used when I first got into astronomy. Sal recognized it before I put all the red tape. This is the old Edmund Scientific 3-inch Space Conqueror.
I had that telescope.
And it's the only one I used for 10 years. And what I was going to do is talk about my adventures with this telescope and small telescope astronomy in general, because I like it simple. I could take this telescope, might be observing just a matter of minutes. So I think we'll table it for maybe sometime when you need a guest speaker.
Sure.
When's your next opening, by the way? You having?
December it starts.
We're for December then.
Sure.
And I did give the talk before, basically the value of small telescope astronomy. I'll just tell you a quick story. My first stellophane in 1973, I brought this telescope with me. And as we're driving up the hill, back then, they didn't have the giant Dobbs yet. A 6 to 8 inch telescope, those were huge, and they were all over the hill. 6 to 8 inch equatorial mount, and I got this little piece of junk. So I didn't even take it out of the car until it was after dark. But I couldn't afford one of those bigger telescopes, and I wasn't in this club, so I could have made my own. But I worked with this scope, and it was amazing the number of things I could see with this little scope. In fact, the very next year, I went back to stellophane. I went to the tent, and I plunked this down in front of the scope of town in front of 200 people, and I talked about the adventures I'd have with a small aperture telescope. And that's what I'll talk about, I guess, in December. I'll add a little bit more to it, but I got a lot of adventures to tell you about this telescope, so we'll save that for another time. I apologize that I couldn't give the talk tonight, but if you're a visual observer, we'll save it for December.
Sure, sounds like a plan.
All right, thank you.
I look forward to that.
Come on, is that your refractor?
Oh, we'll go back and take off just quickly. Go ahead. What is? Whoops. I can talk about the Fortell. Okay, I got all 4 or 5 of these. That's that refractor. I think it's a 70. It's a Tasco, classic Tasco refractor. There's the Edmund. That was what it sold for originally, $29.95. I paid $15 for that one. I've been using it for over 40 years now. In fact, I still use that scope. This is more recent. This is the SkyQuest telescope, 4.5-inch Dobsonian telescope from Orion. And Sal, you remember this one? Anybody else that remembers this?
That was my first scope when I was 11.
The Gilbert telescope. It was the first one I actually did use. I borrowed it from a friend, and this is way back in 1963, I think. And then the Astroscan up here. These are classic examples, and they're all classic telescopes. This is from the small telescope area. So the biggest ones, again, are 4.5-inch refractors. And I'll just tell you this quickly. I've seen the 3C273, the quasar, with that little scope right there, and that's 2 billion light years away. So that's what I'll be talking about in December.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we'll officially close the meeting. The next meeting will be in September on the 14th. And that is a copy-paste error. The next board meeting is not June 22nd. So sorry about that. So meeting adjourned.